The moment Mark felt the room tighten around him, he knew this dinner was never meant to be kind. He sat at a small table near the window of a quiet restaurant in Ohio, fingers wrapped around a sweating glass of water, while the weight of invisible expectations pressed down on his chest. Across the room, three men he barely trusted pretended to scroll their phones, their smirks hidden but not erased. And then the door opened, and everything changed in a way no one had planned for. She stepped inside slowly, as if bracing herself against something unseen. Her name was Rachel. She wore a simple beige dress that did nothing to hide her size, and she clutched her purse like a shield. Her eyes scanned the room with practiced caution, the kind that comes from years of being looked at but never truly seen. Mark watched her pause, swallow hard, and force her feet forward. In that moment, a question slipped into his mind without permission. What if this were you, walking into a room already convinced you were a joke? What choice would you make if you knew everyone expected you to fail? Mark had not dated since his wife, Hannah, died 3 years earlier. Cancer had taken her quickly, cruelly, leaving him alone with a 6-year-old son named Noah, and a grief that never seemed to sleep. His friends said he was too young to give up, that Noah needed to see him happy again. But this night had not come from kindness. It came from pity mixed with cruelty. They thought setting him up with a woman they openly called Obese would be funny, maybe even instructional, as if Mark should be grateful for any attention at all. They did not know the nights he spent folding tiny socks with shaking hands, or the mornings he packed lunches while swallowing memories he could not afford to feel. Rachel reached the table, her face already flushed, clearly aware of the stares. Mark stood up instinctively, his chair scraping the floor louder than necessary. He saw the flicker of surprise in her eyes, followed by something like disbelief. He pulled out her chair, not as a gesture learned from manners, but from a place deeper, a place that remembered holding Hannah's hand when she was too weak to stand. Rachel sat down carefully, her shoulders tense, waiting for the familiar moment when politeness turned into disappointment. The early minutes passed in heavy silence, broken only by the clink of silverware and the muffled laughter from the other tables. Mark noticed the way Rachel avoided eye contact, how she folded and unfolded her napkin as if preparing for an inevitable rejection. He felt anger rise, not at her but at the cruelty of assumptions. People thought his life had ended with Hannah, that he was desperate, that this setup was a mercy. They were wrong. His life had not ended. It had cracked open, exposing every raw nerve. As the meal unfolded, Mark learned about Rachel without realizing it was happening. He noticed how she spoke about her job at a church-run community center, how her voice softened when she mentioned helping struggling families. He saw how she laughed quietly at her own awkwardness, a laugh shaped by years of being told to take up less space. He thought about Noah, about the way his son asked why some kids were mean for no reason. He wondered how many times Rachel had asked herself the same question. The men in the background grew restless. This was not going as planned. There were no visible signs of discomfort, no quick exit, no humiliation to savor. Mark could feel their eyes burning into his back, waiting for him to perform the role they had written for him. Instead, something else happened. A memory surfaced, uninvited, of Hannah in a hospital gown, her body swollen from treatment, her hair gone, her smile unchanged. He remembered telling her she was beautiful when she could not see it anymore, and meaning it with every part of himself. At some point, Mark felt a shift inside him, a quiet decision forming. He realized this was bigger than a date, bigger than embarrassment. It was about what kind of man he wanted Noah to grow up watching. It was about whether grief would harden him or teach him compassion. He stood again, not abruptly, but with purpose, and the room seemed to still. Without raising his voice, Mark spoke words that carried anyway. He spoke about loss, about how love had once taught him that bodies change, that beauty fades and returns in unexpected forms. He spoke about how his wife had grown fragile and heavy with illness, and how that never made her less worthy of love. He spoke about raising a son alone, about the fear of becoming bitter, about choosing kindness even when the world expects cruelty. He said that sitting across from Rachel, he did not see a joke or a setup. He saw a human being who had walked into a room knowing she might be hurt and did it anyway. And that courage, he said, was something he respected deeply. Tears fell quietly across the room. A waitress paused near the kitchen door, her hand over her mouth. One of the men near the wall lowered his phone, shame replacing amusement. Rachel's hands trembled as she listened, her eyes shining not with humiliation but with something dangerously close to hope. No one clapped, no one laughed. The silence that followed was heavy and sacred. Mark sat back down, his heart pounding, unsure if he had done the right thing, but certain he had done an honest one. Rachel looked at him differently now, not as a woman waiting to be judged, but as someone standing on equal ground. Whatever happened next did not feel like a test anymore. The night ended without grand gestures. They walked out separately, exchanging a quiet smile that carried more weight than promises. Mark went home to Noah, tucked him into bed, and held him a little longer than usual. Rachel drove home and cried in her car, not from pain, but from relief, from the rare experience of being defended without asking. Life did not transform overnight. Mark and Rachel did not rush into a fairy tale. They met again weeks later, slowly, carefully, both carrying scars. But something fundamental had shifted. A room full of people had witnessed compassion where cruelty was expected, and it changed them, even if they never admitted it. Before this story ends, take a moment and ask yourself, if you had been in that room, which side of the silence would you have chosen, and please share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you of the power of empathy, quiet courage, and second chances, then gently consider liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing, so more hearts can be reached with stories that matter.